Welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm your host, Dr. David Hooper, and today I am thrilled to introduce my guest, Georgette Desira. As a mental health expert specializing in anxiety and low confidence, Georgette brings over 20 years of experience in the mental health field. Georgette has a diverse background, which includes working in prisons, probation offices, and mental health wards. And Georgette empowers her clients to overcome an anxiety and build unshakable confidence. So get ready to be inspired as we delve into Georgette's journey. Georgette, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's such a lovely introduction. Thank you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's so nice to have finally got this in the diary, and it's so great to be able to speak to you. And the question I always love to start with relates to the title of the podcast, which is Unstoppable Introverts. And I'm really interested to know, what does being unstoppable look like or mean to you?
Scared or how full of fear you might be to do something, you use that fear to push through and do it regardless. So nothing can literally stop you, because from my experience, most of the things that stop us is ourselves and our own beliefs that we can't do something. So being able to push through that and do it regardless is what makes a person unstoppable.
I love that answer. I love that answer. It's so good, and making sure you're progressing and moving forward. It's so good. And if there's people who are meeting you for the first time today, how do you introduce yourself to those new people?
I guess I would say I'm a therapist that's not only got the qualifications and the experience, but I've been there as well. I was incredibly introverted as a youngster. I wouldn't, like, even conversations in the school playground, I didn't even know how to have them. And I've gone from not being able to speak to people to now being a therapist and sharing my knowledge. So it's not just knowing how to help someone, but it's knowing that you can help someone because you've been there yourself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And when it comes to what you do now, why anxiety and confidence and introversion? Where did that passion for those subjects come from?
I think it is from my own journey. I was very much an introvert growing up. I really struggled with my confidence, and it held me back for so many years, and I really restricted myself with what I was doing with my life, to a point where a few years I was literally just working and going home, because I was just so scared to get out of my comfort zone. And through the work that I do in the NHS now, I talk to so many people on a daily basis that I really resonate with. And so I feel like these things were always an issue, but I feel like since lockdown, there's so many more people struggling with them. There's so many more people that, because of the lockdown, because of isolation, they're really struggling to leave the house, they're really struggling to socialise again, they're really struggling to do what they considered normal things, like going to the pub and stuff like that. So I feel like it's so much more of an issue since lockdowns happened.
And where did your love for psychology come from? Because I know you did your bachelor's degree and then your master's degree, and have gone on to do these wonderful things. So where did that interest in that subject come from?
Weirdly enough, it came from wanting to help myself. So I honestly thought as a teenager there was something seriously wrong with me. I thought I had a screw loose or a screw missing or something. I just wasn't working as well as everyone else was working in life. So when the opportunity to study psychology at A level came into my life at sixth form, I took it with both hands. And since then, it's just literally been a passion. It's really supported me understanding myself better, but also understanding other people better as well.
Yeah, so take us back to those early days then at school, perhaps. Were you quite quiet and quite to yourself?
Yeah, not just at school, like literally every aspect of life. I was very much just in my little box, and I didn't like to get out of it. I think it was quite a difficult not little town. It was in East London that I grew up with. It was very sort of, I was, I've got Egyptian parents, but it was very sort of white culture in the town we grew up in. And I think even is it the English Defence League? They were going for like the local seat in Parliament when I was growing up. So that's how much sort of the area I grew up in just didn't like accept people like me. So it was a combination of culturally feeling like I'm out of place, because all the girls I went to school with had like straight hair, were really skinny, had light skin. Us Egyptian people, we're quite hairy. I've got hairy arms, and so I stuck out like a sore thumb. But I also had 3 older brothers as well, that you think older brothers would look after and protect you, but my older brothers just picked on me and put me down all the time. So the combination of those 2 things made me just feel like I was always the odd one out. I was the odd one out at home because I was the only girl. I was the odd one out at school because I was the only one sort of like ethnically diverse girl in my class. So it just made me feel really isolated and with no one to really connect with.
And what was it like growing up in that situation where you did feel like you were the only person like you, at school or at home, or, in all these different places? Because I think that doesn't get talked about enough.
Yeah, I think the sad thing is I felt incredibly alone. I felt like I had no one to talk to. I felt like I had no one who understood me. And I guess in situations like that, we don't try and look at what's unique about us and what's special about us. We just think there's something wrong with us. So that was where my thinking went as a young child. I was just like, what's wrong with me that I can't connect with other people, instead of actually looking outside of myself thinking, okay, what's wrong with them that they can't connect with me?
And we progress through school, and we get to sixth form, and you've really enjoyed psychology. What was that next step like then, as a shy, unconfident introvert, going to university to study psychology? Was there a switch there where you started to own yourself a bit more and accept yourself a bit more? Or what was that journey like as you progressed through your studies?
I think it started, but I was still holding myself back a little bit. So I did go to uni, but I didn't move away from home like most people did, because again, I was really scared of being in a new environment and being the odd one out, when on reflection, that probably could have been the best thing for me. So I lived at home while going to uni. So while my life was getting bigger, I was building friendships. I had my first partner when I was in my late teens. Like, things were getting bigger for me. I was still very much restricting myself and still not knowing where I fitted in the world.
No, absolutely. It's really interesting to hear your story, because I was very similar at university. I stayed at home and went to the uni closest to my house and didn't want to go further, and all these different things. So, and I think a lot of introverts maybe have done that as well. And to change the conversation a little bit, Georgette, at what point is it introversion, and what point is it anxiety or shyness or low confidence? How do you break those different areas up?
So I think how I see it is that my personality type is an introvert, but I'm Gemini, so I know I can be extrovert when I'm around the people I trust. So like my husband and son, they get the stupid side of me that I just sing in the house and stuff. So I see it as introversion is part of who I am, and it's part of my personality. And anxiety and low confidence are more of like the symptoms that sometimes gets triggered because I'm quite introvert. And so I know when I hold myself back and put myself in my box, that's when those symptoms of anxiety and low confidence can start to be displayed a bit more.
Interesting. And do you think people get those confused?
Yeah, of course. Like, and that's fine. Like, everyone might have their own perception from their own experience about what each one means to them. Because obviously, I've got clients who say I'm a really anxious person, and I try and say, no, let's reframe that, because you never want to call yourself an anxious person. Anxiety is just an emotion you're feeling. So I think it's about validating that for people, but also empowering them to know anxiety, low confidence. They're just things you're feeling. They're not your what's the right word? They're not your consistent state, and you can get out of that if you're willing to do the work to sort of get really uncomfortable and sort of face your fears.
Yeah, and we're going to definitely get into how you actually go and do that, because that is going to bring so much value to so many people. But before that, if we jump back into your university life then, were you different to that school, Georgette? Or were you a little bit more outgoing, expressing yourself a little bit more in a university setting? Or were you very much the same?
I think I started to be a bit more sort of outgoing. I obviously started to go on nights out with my friends that I met at uni and things like that. But I do feel like staying at home held me back a little bit, because I lived in East London. I went to university in South London, which doesn't sound like they're far away, but to travel on public transport, it takes a bit of time. And so it meant that I wasn't able to fully embrace sort of the experience my friends were having, because they all lived in the dorms and were all socialising. So I was feeling more of a part of it, but still feeling not fully. It still wasn't my place. It still wasn't the place I felt fully accepted.
Yeah, I feel very, very similar. I think it wasn't until a few years after I'd finished my studies, I kind of reflected back and thought at 28, 29, I could have maybe gone to university and had a much better experience with me being maybe a bit more confident, or, rather than at 18, 19, 20, those youngest ages where I just wasn't confident. I was very shy, painfully shy sometimes, and I wasn't able to express myself like I can now. So yeah, I think it's really interesting, the different experiences we have at these different stages of our lives. And at what point during those studies was it where you thought, right, I feel like this might be the right career for me? And what was the next step after university?
So I kind of just went to uni because it was like the thing everyone did back in the day, and you just went to uni and got your degree. And then when I finished my bachelor's, I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. I'm just going to go and do another degree. So I ended up doing a master's because I didn't know what I wanted to do. And it is really scary if while I knew psychology was my passion, the field of psychology is huge. You can do so many different things in psychology. So I knew it was my passion, but there wasn't one thing that I was like, yeah, this is the thing that I definitely want to do. And it kind of ended up falling in my lap. Like, it kind of just went on this path, to be honest.
Right. And what was the first role you got after university?
So after I'd done my master's, I was looking for jobs for ages. And I was part of the job centre as well, going every day. And it was literally at that 6 month mark where the job centre was like, oh, we're going to have a serious conversation because you haven't got a job yet. I got offered a job as a social therapist on acute mental health wards in East London. And so I was just like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to take this. This isn't what I wanted to do. I kind of just wanted to sit behind a desk and maybe do research because that felt a bit safer. But okay, let's go to an acute mental health ward in one of the most deprived boroughs in London. And I did not know what was in store for me at all.
I bet that's quite, you're thrown in at the deep end there.
Literally. So it was a 19-bed acute mental health ward in East London in Tower Hamlets, a very, very deprived area. So there was a lot of drug use, a lot of violence, and sometimes there would only be two of us on staff. So there'd be a registered nurse and then me as a social therapist. And these were people that were acutely unwell. So some of them were incredibly dangerous, and there was only two of us to look after 19 of them. It was bonkers.
That is bonkers. How did you prepare to go and do that role? Because it does sound really challenging just hearing about that situation. Yeah, how did you go and be the best version of yourself in that situation?
I don't think I prepared. I was very naive. I was just like, oh, it's a job, let me go and do it. I was just happy to earn and have a living. And I remember that my manager asked me to come in one day to like just do some paperwork and stuff. So I went onto the ward, and as soon as I walked onto the ward, one of the patients like started coming up to me and touching my hair, and I was like a shy like young woman at the time. I was like, why are you touching me? Like, this isn't what people are meant to do. So when I'd done the paperwork, and my boss at the time was like, oh, you know, you can stay around, hang out, get to know everyone. I was like, no, I'm going, I'll see you later. So I really didn't prepare myself at all. And it was actually an experience I had on the ward that changed things for me and kind of made me a lot stronger. So there was one woman client who always suffered from bipolar and psychosis let me word it right, drug-induced psychosis. So whenever she started using drugs again, she would start to hallucinate and start to hear voices and things like that. And whenever she was unwell, she hated me, like literally hated me to the point she wanted to kill me. She would throw hot tea on me. She threw like her lunch at me. She would like really go for me and would really like threaten me and say she's going to kill me. And so I can never be around her. She did physically assault me a couple of times, and I can never be around her. And I remember going home after one time when she hit me, and my dad was like, you have to quit that job. Like, you can't go to work and be like physically hit. That is not what work's about. Like, it's not good for you. And I remember crying. I was crying on the ward. I had to leave work early that day. But then when my dad said that, I was like, wait, hold on. No one's going to tell me what I can and can't do. And I was like, I'm going to go back to work tomorrow, and I'm going to show up, and I'm going to do the best I can. And it was literally a changing point where I started building boundaries and resilience, and started really like setting expectations of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So it was really sort of a life-changing experience for me.
It sounds it. And it sounds like, you know, the experiences that you went through there firstly were terrible. And I think that a lot of that does go on still that we don't hear about. And there's a lot of people doing some great work that really are dealing with those challenging situations. But then the second thing that was really interesting there was that you started to contract a little bit and draw up the lines and the boundaries and setting these different standards or things you would allow and or wouldn't allow. Talk us through what that looked like, as in what changes did you make, or how did you approach things differently?
So it really started off in that job where I just started being quite firm with my language with a client. You know, it's really difficult because this is their home for months. A lot of them are sectioned for months on end. So it can be quite blurred boundaries at a time where you're a bit like joking around, having fun with them like you would with friends. But I started being really quite firm, quite boundaried, but also like thinking about their needs as well. A lot of what you do on acute mental health wards is de-escalation. So if you start to see someone getting worked up, it's about thinking about, okay, what is their need? What is their want? And is that something we can provide? And if it is, why don't we just provide it instead of them pacing the ward for the next 40 minutes and then kicking off because we're all ignoring them? So it was a really fascinating job because it was baptism by fire. It was crazy that they allowed me, because it wasn't just me as a young woman on the ward. The whole unit had social therapists that were all sort of around 23, 24, and we were all really young out of university, so we were all pretty naive. And it was crazy that they put us in this situation with quite clinically unwell people. So we all sort of started to support each other. We all started getting boundaries. I became close friends with some of the registered nurses that I knew I could trust, and they were teaching me like how you manage it and what you do, and if this happens, what you do. And so I just was willing to learn, willing to be open, and willing to be quite firm, even though it's uncomfortable. Like the first time you set a boundary, it's so uncomfortable because you're like, oh, that person's going to think I'm a horrible person. But that's how you build respect with people. And that's how, when the clients started respecting me and they started realizing, oh, they can't take the piss out Georgette anymore because she's not going to put up with it.
Yeah, it sounds like such a transformational moment, and I'm so pleased you had it. And you know, you've obviously gone on to do what you've done. And trying to apply this for people who are listening, then I think something that a lot of introverts, and I'm generalizing here, a lot of introverts maybe struggle with is that boundary setting and maybe saying no and being taken advantage of a little bit and maybe standing up for themselves a little bit. What would be your advice if we were going to help them start to draw up those boundary lines a little bit?
I think it's one thing about the reason why you're saying no, because that reason is so important. And a lot of the reasons we say no is because when we say no to someone else, we're saying yes to ourselves. So it's about reminding yourself why you're setting that boundary, practicing setting that boundary. Sometimes we can lose our language when we're in that conversation. So practicing actually saying no, I don't want to do that. And you can literally, that's a no. Like, as far as I care, that's the answer. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to make excuses. You can just be like, no, that doesn't work for me. Sorry. And that's it. That's it. You don't have to explain yourself further. So really practice those phrases so it becomes second nature. But then practice being very consistent. So you have to be consistent with that boundary, because the minute someone hears a no, 100% you're going to challenge it. Like, even my husband to this day, he still challenges like my boundaries. I'll say, I'm not watching Spurs. He's like, no, you're gonna. And I'm like, no, it's not going to happen. So you've got to be consistent. You always got to be, no, I don't want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. And sometimes no is a full answer. You really don't have to add anything to that sentence. You can say no, and that's fine.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one of my own biggest changes was developing that ability to say no and to agree with myself what I was going to do or what I wasn't going to do when I had too much work on, for example, and I couldn't take more on. Because I was very much, I'll take it on. That's no problem. I can help everybody. And at that point where I said, actually, no, I've got enough here, or I'm being taken advantage of, I felt like, I think you mentioned the word respect, and I think that is a really key word here. I felt more respected by drawing up those boundaries and saying, no, this is where I am, and I think a lot of people will be able to apply what you've talked about there. So it's really, really helpful. It's so good. If we go back to your career journey, then what happened after the mental health ward? What was the next step?
So I kind of had to leave the mental health ward because there was an incident on a different ward where a patient was murdered by another patient, basically, is what happened. So me and my friend, who both worked in the ward at the time, we were like, we have to leave. This place is not safe anymore. So then there was a mental health service in the NHS called IAP services. I'm trying to remember what IAP stands for. Something access to psychological therapies. I can't remember what I stands for. Where again they were looking for young psychology graduates to become psychological wellbeing practitioners. So get a postgraduate diploma and in CBT techniques to help people with anxiety and depression. So we both applied for that. We both got accepted, and that was my next step. So I went from sort of inpatient units to working in primary mental health care in the community, I guess you would.
Really cool. That's a really interesting next step. When it comes to CBT, then, for those who may not be aware of what that is, can you explain how that therapy works, what it is and how that therapy works?
Yes, it's cognitive behavioural therapy, and it's literally does what it says in the tin. You look at your cognitive side of things or your behavioural side of things. So we all have triggers. All of us have triggers, no matter how well you manage your mental well-being, and that trigger will impact your thoughts. So just to give an example, let's say I was like nervous about doing this podcast, so I would have that external trigger of getting anxious, having to put myself out there to do podcasts. That would trigger thoughts in me like, oh, I can't do this, no one's going to want to listen to me, I've got nothing of value to add. That would then lead me to feeling quite anxious. I would then get those physical symptoms of anxiety, like maybe breathlessness or shaking. And then that might lead to the behaviour of avoidance. I'd be like, nah, this is too much, I'm cancelling, I can't do it. But then that would then lead back into those thoughts of, I'm useless, no one wants to listen to me, I just can't do it. So we get in these vicious cycles. And what CBT says is that actually you can break these cycles, and it's really easy to break these cycles, and you do it by focusing on the cognitive, the thought side, or the behavioral side, because we can't control how we feel. Our feelings are very reactive and automatic, and our physical sensations are exactly the same. So let's focus on those two areas we can control, which are our thoughts and our behaviors. So you learn very basic, very simple, very easy to learn techniques that you then apply consistently every day for a period of time, that will then teach you how to break these cycles and develop more positive cycles.
So good. Yeah, so interesting. And what would be some example of triggers that maybe some of the audience could look out for if they were struggling?
I guess maybe a social event, maybe you got invited to a party. I know I used to get really anxious when people invite me to their birthday parties, and it was always that period where you have to walk into the
Oh,
club by yourself. And I
yeah.
was like, oh, so it could be a meeting at work where you have to speak up and answer some questions, maybe a presentation, maybe a family event, maybe your relationships with your family are not that great. Maybe that's where your anxiety initially got triggered, then having to spend time with family might be really difficult. It it could be anything really. The amount of different triggers us introverts especially have. I think it's just any situation where we potentially could be center of attention and we're worrying about doing well or being looked at or what people would think. I feel will be triggering for any of us.
Definitely. Yeah, that's so, you're so right. And would you say that these feelings can go completely, or is it more about managing those feelings?
So no, I don't believe you can just get rid of anxiety. I don't believe you can just get rid of depression. Anyone that makes these claims, I'm not sure it's being 100% truthful. I think our feelings are feelings. We have them for a reason, especially anxiety, such an evolutionary feeling we have that kept humans alive for hundreds of years. And if it wasn't for anxiety, we'd be dead as a species now. So every feeling is valid, and it's so important we have every feeling. And I don't believe in negative feelings, I don't believe in positive ones. They are just labels we've given them. It's just a human construct. It's more about learning to sit with your feelings, becoming friends with your feelings, and being willing to feel them. They're literally called feelings, so you have to feel them, because every feeling is there to give you a message. And usually when you get anxious, it's usually to tell you there might be a real threat or there's a perceived threat that you're making up in your head, and you need to face that in order to overcome it. So I think feelings are so important and so essential to humans and our lives, basically.
I love this. I love what you're saying, Georgia. I can see myself in lots of what you're talking about. And what does kind of feeling your feelings mean? How can we get comfortable the phrase "get comfortable being uncomfortable" is thrown about quite a lot. But what does that kind of really mean? Feeling those feelings, and really acknowledging them.
So I think it's about looking at how, when that feeling crops up for you, how you respond. So many of us numb ourselves from the feeling. So some use really destructive things like drink, drugs, um, maybe gambling, maybe shopping addictions. But also there's so many everyday things that we do to numb ourselves. Netflix, like just watching box series on Netflix, or scrolling on your phone for hours. All these things are numbing you from feeling what's coming up. So when you get anxious, even though, yes, oh my God, it's so uncomfortable, and you do feel like you're going to die or have a heart attack sometimes, you have to just sit and literally just feel that feeling, especially with anxiety, because the more you fight it, the more it's going to persist in the body. You literally want the anxiety to come up so those physical symptoms can move on faster and quicker, because your body's incapable of feeling anxiety for a long period of time. So if you just allow it to come up, it will decrease really quickly, a lot quicker than you think it would, than if you fight it and try and ignore it, because if you try and ignore it, it's just going to come back even harder.
I think that's so right, and it's so interesting. And yeah, I've just got so many examples of the situations you're talking about, where I've talked about on this podcast a few weeks ago about where I wanted to start this podcast in the middle of 2023, but I allowed my imposter syndrome really to take over. And I essentially procrastinated on starting this podcast for about a couple of months. And I was so anxious about that whole situation. It led to all sorts of things, to panic attacks and to all these different things. When if I just started to take some action, it went as soon as I started to develop the podcast, it completely cleared up. So it was, I think it's really funny that, sometimes the anxiety you're feeling is there because you are putting something off or you aren't facing it head on, which then prolongs the anxiety. So it's almost like this cycle which you get trapped in.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? Because action is the thing we avoid as introverts and anxious people, but action is the remedy to anxiety and low confidence and being introvert. The more we take action, whether it's messy or not, the more confident we feel in what we do. And action is the most important thing that anyone who feels like they're anxious or they got low confidence or they're introvert, it's the most important thing you need to do. You need to take action on where you want to go.
Definitely. And with that in mind then, with taking action, something that I think you mentioned this as well, Georgette, that just preparing for the podcast, I am terrible for nerves. So every time I do a podcast, every time I do a speech or, speak or, go on stage or most things actually, I get very nervous about. But I've kind of worked out ways to be able to still do them and to succeed at some of them. What about to those people who are listening? What's your examples of that? How do you personally cope with, being, like you mentioned, lots of eyes on you and being center screen and dealing with your version of those nerve-wracking moments?
Yeah, I think if you're a natural introvert, you're so conditioned to feel anxious before anything where you're center of attention. Like even I still get anxious so many times when I have to be center of attention. And even my wedding day, which was last year, I was like so anxious about. But I think how I deal with it is that I learn what tools support me and I double down on them when I got something coming up. So anxiety lives in the body. So anything to do with the body is so helpful for me. So I would make sure I'm working out regularly, make sure I'm eating healthy so I don't spike my sugar or have a caffeine hit or whatever it is. I'm just keeping it quite consistent. Just before I do anything that's anxiety provoking, I'll put on like really good music and dance around like an idiot and just like literally shake it out of my body. But then I also make sure I'm mindful of who I'm around, what sort of conversations I'm having, what sort of TV I'm having, because all these things influence sort of how you feel on the inside. So if you're watching a lot of like violent things on TV, or if you're having a lot of negative conversations with people, or you're around a lot of negative people, it just heightens your anxiety and makes you feel quite worse. So it's really about thinking not just those 2 minutes before you're about to do something, but those sort of 3 or 4 days before you're about to do something that's quite anxiety provoking for you. Tap into all those tools that really support you and double down on them before that thing. And then afterwards, really just be honest with yourself. You're going to be knackered afterwards because the adrenaline would have been pumping and
something that actually led to the title of the podcast was part of my toolkit that I use to feel like I can feel before I deliver stuff. And there's a song, I don't know if you've heard it, by Sia called Unstoppable. And sometimes I've listened to that for like 2 hours on repeat before I've gone and done something. And it really helped. And that ended up, I was like, I'm going to have to put that in the podcast title. Unstoppable's got to be in there because I owe it to Sia.
Yeah, definitely. It's such a good song, and it is a song like everyone who's struggling with low
Yeah.
confidence or whatever should have in your playlist. Like, it's such a good song, and I do have playlists that are just all about confidence builders, where I have like songs like that, and then I have like random things like Eminem in there as well, because it's just like really good music to listen to, and he's got really like inspiring
Yes.
lyrics in his songs. And music is such a good tool to tap into, because we all love music, and it's about being mindful about what type of music you listen to. Don't just put on like Damien Rice all the time. Like, listen to like really upbeat music to make yourself feel good.
You know, something that I actually have never admitted before, Georgette, so this is for your ears only, is that something that helps me prepare is actually like singing and like belting out songs, sometimes quite cheesy songs, but you know, that sometimes helps me. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right with the music part. I think that plays such a big part. Do you have a go-to song if you had one?
Oh, there's so many. I don't think I've just got one. Because I know, like, there's Imagine. This is where my memory is really
Yeah.
bad. Like, Imagine Dragons have got a really good song I listen to quite a lot. Oh, Destiny's Child and
Yeah,
Survivor from
yeah.
back in the day. Like, there's so many really, really good songs. And it's weird you say singing, because singing is, I do that as well. And I think there's something about, because when you sing, you take bigger breaths. And I think there's something about not only just getting the energy out, but actually breath is such an important tool to help ground us when feeling anxious. So maybe there's something around
Yeah.
singing and taking those bigger breaths means that actually you're grounding your nervous system, and that's why it's such a powerful thing to do.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well, it certainly helps. I'm not sure my neighbors appreciate it, but it helps me anyway. That's really good. And at what point then did you decide, you know what, I want to go out on my own a little bit here and start my own business? At what point did that happen for you?
Oh, well, again, I feel like I don't really make the decisions. I feel like universal God makes it for me. So it was, lockdown happened, and I was a service manager for a charity at the time, where I was managing a project for women in the criminal justice system that had personality disorders. So they were the most high risk, high
Mm.
harm, dangerous women in London probation. So it was my passion project. I was on the project for 8 years. I became service manager. I absolutely loved it. But then just before lockdown, we took on a lot of new staff because our funding got extended. And unfortunately, one of the members of staff wasn't really doing her job at the time. And so during the conversations I had with her, she actually accused me of racism, because she said the only reason I'm sort of challenging her was because she was a woman of colour. And it was literally just after George Floyd as well, which was highly upsetting for everyone, but anyone of colour. It was a really difficult thing to sort of have to watch, and then to be accused of it yourself. It sent me on a spiral of quite bad anxiety, because I was at home working. It's me, my husband, and my son at the time. We were in this tiny two-bed flat in London, where my work was literally at my dinner table. I was accused of this awful thing. I couldn't get out of my house to talk to anyone about it, to like have that connection with anyone else about it. And I went in a spiral of quite serious anxiety at the time. So I ended up quitting that job because I didn't feel supported by my organisation at the time. I took a few months out just to look after my son during lockdown, because my partner's a teacher, so he was obviously really busy as well. And then just by taking some time out, I actually realised I don't want to do things based on anyone else's guidelines anymore. I feel like I've got a lot of knowledge, I've got a lot of experience. I know what works, I know what doesn't work. Let me just do this myself, and let me just do what works in the way that I know it works.
That's a really powerful step for you to take. And when you talk about that departure from that previous organization and that spiral, what were some of your symptoms that were presented, as you went through that process?
Or I couldn't be present. I wasn't really being present for my partner at the time. I was very much like just in my head so much. I wasn't eating very well. we weren't socializing, we were in lockdown, but I weren't calling my parents as much, I weren't checking in with them as much. And it really hit my confidence, because I know that wasn't what was happening when I had the conversation, and I understand the dynamics of culture and color and all this sort of thing, and but I was still questioning myself, like, am I a racist? Like, is this what's going on here? Am I a racist person? So it really impacted my confidence significantly.
Yeah, I can imagine, and that it isn't a nice situation. And how was it resigning from that role and going on to start your own business? Did you feel a sense of relief and freedom, or was it still, an anxiety-inducing kind of time for you then?
I think I felt quite lost, because I was in that role for 8 years. It was quite a significant period of time, and I loved the
Mm.
organisation, and I loved what they do. It was really close to my heart. So I, I, I felt like I was going
Yeah.
through a period of mourning almost, because I felt quite low, and I didn't have a lot of motivation at the time, and it was really difficult. So I, I don't think I came out of it like, yes, I'm going to do this, I know what I'm doing. I think it took me a few months, to be honest, to really work out what I wanted to do. And luckily, we were very lucky. We had savings that we could sort of lean on when I wasn't earning. But I think it was a really tough time. And I think that's what's interesting about introverts, is that when someone else tells you who you are, we believe it more than extroverts do. And I lost my ability to have boundaries between what someone else
Mm.
was saying and who I believe I am, because there was so much going on in the world, and we were all just surviving through that year or two that we were in lockdown. So all my strength and all my coping mechanisms, like seeing family and going out for walks and things like that, were all taken away from me. And we didn't have a garden, so we were just literally in this tiny flat.
And you then decide to start the business. And did that come before or after you started to find your purpose again? Because I think it's a really important topic, because I think a lot of people feel lost, or feel a lack of purpose, and to find that thing can be life changing. And yeah, I'm interested to know what was that process like for you? Did you kind of wake up one morning and think, right, I know exactly what I want to do, or was it more of a gradual process over a few months?
I think it's very much from doing. Like, I worked it out. It was very much just like putting myself out there. I got another qualification as a life coach at the time, so I started learning
Mm.
again, which I love learning. I'm such like a geek in that sense. I really love learning new stuff. And it was from learning and just doing that was like, oh, maybe I could do this. Maybe this would be really helpful. And it's still very much like a growing thing in my head, where I'm very much like, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that, even to this point. um, but I know it's never from thinking, it's only from doing that I know whether something's right for me or not. And I know that from my own journey. If I never got offered that social therapist like job straight after uni, I never would have been here now, because I just wouldn't have went for that job. If I had a choice, I wouldn't have picked it. But because it was sort of like the only choice I had, and I did it, that I realized actually I really love working with people.
No, I'm so glad as well, because then we're here having this conversation, so it's all good. And putting those three things in the mix, then your introversion, anxiety, and low confidence, that doesn't necessarily create a great recipe for going into being an entrepreneur. So, and again, one of the reasons I started this podcast was to shine a light for all introverts, to say you can go and achieve everything extroverts can and more. We don't have to compare ourselves to each other, but you can go and achieve incredible things. Was it scary starting a business?
Yeah, and it still is now, because as a business owner, there's still so many things you have to put. You literally have to put yourself
Yeah.
out there. And it's so against our nature of who we are that we wouldn't normally put ourselves out there. We'd be like cheering on the other person. Yeah, you go do it. Yeah. So it is like it, and I do think like for the rest of my journey, it will be just constantly like challenging myself and putting myself out there and getting uncomfortable in order to grow my comfort zone bigger. And there's so much I'm doing now that I wouldn't have done 5 years ago. I wouldn't have even done a year ago. But because I'm just doing it and I'm like tapping into all those tools I know work for me along the way to give me that confidence to do it's making me more confident the more I do. And that's why action is just so important.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about some of those things that maybe were happening or weren't happening in the early days. Things like, I don't know, things like networking or posting videos on social media, or that type of thing. What did you find a struggle with starting a business or growing that business in the early days that you've managed to overcome now?
I think it was definitely social media. Like, I just was such a private person. I wouldn't want to put myself out there. I wouldn't want people to know what I'm doing. I still get worried about Facebook because obviously I still got a lot of school friends on there. Like, I don't talk to at all, but I'm like, oh my God, what do they think of me? Sort of thing. So it's still like social media is such a difficult thing, and then you get those thoughts of, oh, why is anyone going to care what I have to say? Like, oh, like they might think I'm big-headed or all this sort of thing. But I think how I counteract that is that I just always go back to my clients and I always just think about the powerful transformations they've had, and that's why I'm doing it, because every time I help another person, it makes all that uncomfortableness I feel so worth it, because I never had that person, and I just want to be that person for.
It's a great mission, Georgia. It really is. And, once I go back to that podcast story that I mentioned about procrastinating and being worried about it. And my wife isn't a coach, but because I am, she knows a bit about coaching because I obviously talk a lot about it to her. And I remember she just one day we were just sitting and I was like, oh, I really want to do this podcast, but I'm too scared almost. And she was like, do you think would it help one person if you did it? And I was like, yeah, probably. And she was like, well, that's your answer, isn't it? And I was like, oh no, she used it back. Yeah. She used it against me.
Yeah, that's such a good way. Yeah, it's so important to think like that, because I'm procrastinating. I'd be funny, but I'm procrastinating and starting a Facebook group, because Facebook is that one platform where pretty much everyone from my life is on it. Whereas my Instagram's a bit like I set that up, like I know who's on there. Whereas Facebook's I've had like back in the day, since I was 18 or something. So God knows who's on my friends list. But I really want to start a Facebook group and start doing like weekly trainings. But I've been procrastinating that as well. But I'm going to take that on board and be like, if it can help one person, it's so important to do, without doubt.
Oh, definitely. It's it's a good one, but it'll catch you out as well when you're like, oh, I don't want to. No, that's so good. Yeah. Cool. So something I was really interested to know is a bit more about like your clients, or what are some of the problems that they come to you with? What are some of the common things that are presented when you meet a new client?
I think a lot of what I see is people that have lost who they are because of their low confidence and their anxiety and being natural introverts. They're constantly putting other people first. They're constantly worried about what other people think, and they're constantly thinking that their needs are not important. And the byproduct of that is that they've just completely lost who they are. They don't know what they love, what they hate. They don't know what they want to do with their lives. If they do, they don't have the confidence to go for it. So it's really sort of, people come to me quite lost and not knowing what to do. And even those people know what to do, they don't know how to get to the other side of the river. They know they want to get there, but they don't know how to build that bridge to get there. So it's a lot of people that, I'm trying to word it right, really struggle with who they are, what they want to do, and how to get there.
And I have been on, like I think I mentioned to you earlier, on your socials a lot, obviously to prepare for this interview, and your website. And I think that It's so good. And I'll share all your links in the show notes as well. But something that I thought might be interesting to talk about is um, for those people who you've got a great list of are you struggling with, and then a list of key problems or challenges that people might come to you with. And the one I thought was really interesting was the missing out on opportunities one. And it's, I think, is so aligned to this podcast because, like I mentioned, I want introverts just to feel like they can go and do everything they want and, pursue everything they want and not be held back from. So how would you talk to someone who was feeling like that, like the world was passing them by, maybe they were stuck in their comfort zone a bit, or they were just, they were allowing these opportunities to blow off into the midst because they just weren't ready or didn't want to take action?
I think I would probably say it's okay. Like, you're missing out on them at the moment because you're doing the best you can with what you know. So let's make what you know bigger. Let's make your knowledge base bigger. Let's make your tools bigger. Let's make your skills bigger. Let's learn how to cope with any symptom you have and learn to cope with sort of any limited beliefs you have, so that when the next opportunity comes, even though without a doubt you're going to be scared, without a doubt you're going to be fearful, and your brain is going to give you every excuse not to do it, you're going to have everything in your toolbox to actually be like, yeah, I'm absolutely bricking it.
What's your number one thing in your toolbox that you reach out for in those moments?
I think it's physical movement for me. Like, there's so much power in moving your body. And I know the more I work out, the more I dance. I go dance classes every week. The more I dance around my kitchen while cooking and listening to good music, the more confident I feel, because you're physically getting rid of all that adrenaline, but also you're doing something so powerful for your body. You're taking control of it. And if you can treat your body with such respect, and you can start to teach your mind with respect as well.
If there is an introvert listening today who is in that kind of situation, they're ready, they are ready to go, but they're putting those blocks on themselves, what would your words of wisdom be for them?
I would say if a Egyptian East Londoner who grew up incredibly shy and such low confidence can now be on the internet chatting about things to help you, then you can without a doubt do anything, because like 5-year-old Georgette never ever would have done stuff like this. Even like 25-year-old Georgette never would have done stuff like this. So honestly, if I can do it with all the challenges I've faced within my life, you without a doubt can do it. And it's just about not being overwhelmed by the bigger picture, and start small. Start with very small daily habits that don't have to take a lot of time. They could just be 5 minutes of journaling, a 5-minute walk, 5 minutes of dancing to Sia Unstoppable in your kitchen while you're cooking. Start with these small things consistently over time, and you will start to feel more confident to take action on the things you want to take action on.
I love that. It's giving me goosebumps. I feel like I'm ready to go and take some action right now. It's so good. And Georgia, I want to be respectful of your time. So my last question is, what's next for you in 2024?
Well, through all the years of supporting people, I've finally sort of worked out my signature program, and I don't believe in sort of long-term therapy. I don't believe people should be in counselling for years. I believe that sort of you can't think your way to being confident. You can't think your way out of anxiety. So much of it is about taking action. That I've developed sort of a 6-week program. It's 6 weeks because it's meant to be doable, and it's meant to give you impact straight away and teach you a combination of CBT but also life coaching as well. So I'm taking the best of science but also the best of the sort of more like fluffy spirituality side of things as well, and combining it in a 6-week program to support people. I've been doing it one-to-one, but I'm hoping to set it up as a group program. And I then will also do the Facebook group as well. It's something that I really have been thinking about for a while, and I feel really passionate about it. So I just need to think about that one person and just do it now. But I guess the overall goal for this year is just to help as many people as possible to sort of believe in themselves and go and live the life that they really deserve.
Amazing. Such a great mission and such exciting plans. And with those plans in mind, where can people find you and connect with you and work with you?
So I'm mostly on Instagram. It's just my name, Georgette. No, it's not my name anymore. I've changed it. It's confidence anxiety coach. So confidence underscore anxiety underscore coach. So that's mostly where I hang out, but I'm also on Facebook underneath my name. Yeah, please, like, if any questions or if you just want to say hi, I liked your guest podcast. I didn't. Feel free to say you did it. I don't mind. Got me.
Amazing, amazing. And I will share all of your links as well so people can find you really easily and see the amazing work you are doing. And Georgette, thank you so much for your time today. It's been brilliant.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
The pleasure is all mine. Genuinely, it's been a really interesting conversation, and thank you so much for your time, for sharing your insights and expertise with us all today. I think we've all learned so much and can go and practically apply it as well, which is brilliant. And thank you so much to everybody who has tuned in to listen. Remember, your introversion isn't the thing that'll hold you back. It is the thing that will catapult you towards greatness. Until next time, stay unstoppable.